So I want to begin with a theme that came up in a lot of the questions we got, which is around how anti-Blackness manifests in our Iranian American community. And I know, Neda, you've in your book written a lot about how the experience of immigration of the Iranian American community has influenced the way they perceive race and view race. And in your experiences, in your personal life and in your careers, what comes to mind when you think about anti-Blackness and racism in the Iranian American community?
Thank you also just to Harvard Iranian Summit for organizing this. The two co-panelists, I'm like super geeked out because I'm fans of Niaz and Bianca to the max. So this is really exciting. Now, the question, Parsajan, that you posed, it actually is exactly the connection between how my personal life has influenced my career. Because, I promise I'm not going to go on too long, but it really started because of, I think, something that a lot of the participants who have joined us on the Zoom might relate to, which is I was born in the US. And so I absorbed like a sponge all of the clues and the cues around me about race and racism here in the US. Well, I'm technically in Canada right now, but I mean like when I was growing up in the US. So I think at a very young age there, you learn that race is like both the fundamental way that the economy and the society are organized. And then hopefully as you grow up, also in the US, you will hear at some point that race is also a biological fallacy, right? That like race is not real, it's been an invention. And so for me, it was always kind of balancing that like I saw evidence of race and how consequential it was in people's lives. But as I grew up, I kept hearing a colorblind sort of ideology or, the real sort of scientific truth that race is not an actual biological fact. So at the time that I was beginning to put all of this together as a child, I was also absorbing some secondhand messages about who Iranians are in the middle of all of this. And so many of the messages that I was hearing as a kid are what academics now call the Aryan or the Aryan myth. And I think also some of the participants on this Zoom, like you will know some of the axioms that form the myth. I'm gonna name like 8 of them right now, but there are others too. But hopefully like the things I'm gonna say, you're gonna connect to them and be like, oh yeah, I heard a khale or like a problematic amu say this. One, like the word Iran comes from Arya or Aryan. 2, that the Persian language is one branch on the Indo-European language tree, which means that then Iranians possess some sort of biological or cultural similarity to Europeans. 3, that Zoroastrianism was an antecedent for Western Christianity. 4, that Western like art, culture all go back to the Persian Empire. That the modern notion of human rights traces back to Cyrus in 550 BC. That today's white Europeans are in fact actually migrants who left Iran many millennia ago. That the existence of recessive traits among the Iranian population. So when you have that cousin with like the mubur, the blonde hair, or the light eyes, that is some sort of glimpse into what Iranians used to look like before Arabs and others invaded the land. And finally, that all of these notions that form the Aryan myth or the sense of Iranians Aryai, that these are also like somehow pure and they operate independently from race and ideologies that circulate among like Nazis and white supremacists and others who use similar kinds of vocabulary. So all of these things together form this sort of backdrop for what Iranian immigrants bring with them to the United States. So I want to say that it's important to note that like all of this supposed evidence about the Iranian Aryan myth, it's been debunked by historians. The kind of scientific truth behind it has been debunked by geneticists and a variety of other scientists. We can find in the research that this myth that's supposedly from millennia ago is actually just an invention of the past 150 years from the Qajar era. but it's been sustained by political elites in diaspora and in Iran from every regime since the Qajar era. And these regimes actually are kind of in opposition to each other, and they don't have a lot of things in common, but they actually have a very deep connection to this sort of nationalist Iranian Aryan myth. And so the goal really in the past 150 years has been to erase or mute diversity among Iranians. And this includes, of course, Afro-Iranians among so many other minority groups. And it was really meant to put Iranians within a bigger global politics that's been defined by racial capitalism across centuries. So finally, when you bring all of these things together, the sort of US ideology of white supremacy, the Iranian ideology of the Aryan myth, what is whiteness if it's not always in relation to Blackness, and in this situation, an anti-Blackness? These are all like fundamentally chauvinistic, but they sort of have the same roots. And so I think that my personal life and my career have been in the service of trying to understand, like, why are we so addicted to this myth of whiteness, both in US society, but also the Iranian people? I see it really as a kind of system level delusion and drug. And as individuals, we may show symptoms or cravings for it, but it goes much deeper than the individual level. So as a society, we are absolutely addicted to anti-Blackness. We are addicted to the way that it doles out certain resources to some people and it revokes them from other people. And as Iranians, because we have enjoyed many benefits, we may be in some quarters people of color, but nonetheless, as non-Black Iranians, for those of us who are, you can't really understand our anti-Blackness without understanding like all the places we've lived across a very wide swath of time, and all of the people who have at different times been included or excluded from the Iranian nation. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but yeah, there's just so many different ways that Iranians, I think, can tap into this question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, John, I think that trope of the Iranian myth that you talk about is something that I heard so much growing up. And it was such a thing that was constantly like taught to me that I didn't, as a young kid, I didn't really know that we had Afro-Iranians in Iran or other racial minority groups. And it wasn't until like I watched a film in which I saw an Afro-Iranian that I started to learn about that and read more about it. And I think it's like, it totally erases the existence of Black people inside Iran, and also the existence of the history of slavery inside Iran, that we often also ignore with that myth. So thank you. I think that was like really interesting to hear the kind of history behind it.